Sometimes your camera gets it wrong. Pictures come out too bright or too dark, but you can step in and fix it with one tiny tweak. If your photos look flat, washed out, or oddly dark, you might simply be missing this simple setting. It's called exposure compensation, and it can instantly transform your images. This channel is here to help beginner and intermediate photographers learn how to shoot with confidence. Over the years, I've taught photography in college, workshops, and online. And I found that there's an important, sometimes overlooked feature that some don't often think about, and that's exposure compensation. It's basically like having a brightness dial for your camera without having to touch ISO, shutter speed, or aperture. And if you're learning photography and want to improve your basic knowledge, why not download my ebook, The 3 Essential Pillars of Good Photography? It's completely free when you sign up for my monthly newsletter. Why not grab it after the video in the link below? Here's what we'll cover in this video. What exposure compensation is, how to find and use it on your camera, when to use plus EV or minus EV to fix exposure, a simple demonstration, and a bonus tip for shooting in tricky light. By the end, you'll be able to instantly correct poor exposure even if you shoot in auto mode. Exposure compensation lets you tell your camera, make this shot brighter or darker. EV stands for exposure value. Think of it as a scale from -3 to +3. 0 is neutral, negative or minus darkens the image, while positive or plus brightens it. So really pretty simple and straightforward. And here's what's great about it. It works in shutter priority, aperture priority, program mode, or even if you're in auto. It's a fast fix without changing modes or messing with your ISO settings. On your camera, look for a button marked with a plus or minus, or a dial with a scale from -3 to +3. Now I know nobody loves reading camera manuals. They're like the broccoli of photography. Boring, but good for you. Not reading the camera manual is a bit like buying a sports car and never finding out where the turbo switch is. Trust me, your camera has hidden superpowers waiting to be unlocked. Most cameras use the plus or minus button and the main dial in combination. Some have a dedicated EV dial. Again, check your manual, ask a friend, or let me know your camera model in the comments and I'll help if I can. You can use minus EV when your image looks too bright, like shooting on a beach, in snow, or in direct sun. The camera thinks it's doing a good job, but you lose detail. -1 or -2 exposure compensation, depending on the image, brings the detail back. Use plus or positive EV when the image comes out too dark indoors, in shadows, or at night. The camera may underexpose thinking there's enough light, but you can lift it with +1 or +2 EV to get a better exposure. And here's a big one, backlit subjects. Let's say you're taking a portrait of someone in front of a bright window or against a sunset. The camera will probably expose for the background, and consequently the face becomes a silhouette. By adding +1 or +2 EV, you bring the person's face back, which after all is what really matters. I would maybe start with +1 EV and tweak your exposure to taste from there. Remember, your camera wants everything to be a middle grey, and you're just giving it a nudge in the direction you want it to go. By the way, deliberately backlighting your subject is a great way to get a silhouette if that's what you're going for. In that instance, it's better to turn your subject side on for that profile shot, and it's really easy to do. Maybe for the silhouette scenario, you would dial in -1 or -2 stops of EV. Now let's talk about shooting modes. If you're in aperture priority, A or AV mode, exposure compensation could be your best friend. You pick the aperture for creative control and the camera handles the shutter speed. But if the shot looks a bit off, you just dial in plus or minus exposure compensation to correct it. For example, let's say for instance that you set f2.8 for a portrait with a lovely blurry background. The camera picks the shutter speed, but it's too dark. But instead of raising your ISO, you could add a stop or two of exposure compensation and you're done. In shutter priority mode, S or TV, it works the same way. You choose the shutter speed to control motion, and the camera picks the aperture. If the exposure looks wrong, exposure compensation tells the camera to adjust the aperture for you. But here's the catch. Every lens has limits. If you're in a dark room and you set a fast shutter speed, the camera might want to open the aperture wider. But if you're already at your lens's maximum aperture, there's literally nowhere left to go. And the same thing in bright light. If you're at f22 and ask for minus exposure compensation and the lens is already stopped down to its maximum, the camera cannot give you any more. In that instance, you would need a neutral density filter or perhaps a polarizing filter to reduce the amount of light reaching the sensor. So exposure compensation works well, but it relies on the camera having room to maneuver to give you what's needed. And here's a quick checklist for which modes support exposure compensation. Auto mode on most cameras. Aperture priority A or AV, ideal for depth of field control. Shutter priority S or TV, perfect for motion blur or freezing action. Program mode or P, flexible auto control. In manual, exposure compensation doesn't apply unless you're using auto ISO. So here's the bottom line. Exposure compensation lets you shoot in semi-auto while still making creative choices. Just remember, the lens can only go so far. To take this a step further, turn on your histogram. It may look a bit techy, but it's just a graph that shows how light or how dark your image is. If all the information is slammed left, then the image is too dark. And if it's all slammed right, it's too bright. If you have a balanced curve, that's usually good, depending on the type of image. If you pair using the histogram with exposure compensation, you can fine-tune your shots precisely without guessing. Maybe think of it like a fitness tracker for your exposure. It tells you how you're doing in real time. And if you want a better understanding of how histograms work and how they can be useful, I've got a full video about it, and I'll link that one in the description for you too. Okay, so let's put this to the test. 3 quick shots, 3 simple fixes. First, here's a backlit portrait. At 0 exposure compensation, the face is too dark. If I add some exposure compensation to override what the camera is giving me, the face is perfectly lit, even if the background blows out a little, which I actually prefer in this instance. The second image is a bright lake scene. The camera overshoots it and the highlights are gone. When I dial in 1 or 2 stops of minus exposure compensation, look at that. Cloud detail, tone, texture, all restored. And this is a perfect example of when to use a polarizer, which will also have the effect of reducing the amount of light reaching the sensor. Almost like a built-in exposure compensation, if that makes any sense. Number 3 is a woodland path, dark and shadowy. The camera plays it safe and we end up with an underexposed shot. When I add some exposure compensation, the whole scene lifts and feels alive again. How much exposure compensation you add or subtract will depend on what you're shooting. But like most things, experimentation is the key. So in only seconds, exposure compensation lets you correct your shot before you get to the editing stage, which means you're not at the mercy of auto. You're guiding the camera to do as you want it to. So let's quickly recap what we covered today. Exposure compensation is your brightness control. Use minus EV when everything's too bright. Use plus EV when it's too dark. It works in auto, aperture priority, shutter priority, and in program mode. Get even better results by using it in conjunction with your histogram. So if you start using this one button, your photos will look more professional, even if you're not quite ready yet for manual mode. Now that you know how to fix exposure, keep the momentum going, and don't forget to grab the ebook below. If you found this useful, give it a like, subscribe, and what situation have you struggled with most? Scenes that are too bright or dark underexposed shots? Tell me in the comments and we'll fix this together. And if you'd like more help with your photography, why not watch this one next? And I'd really love to know how you're getting on. In the meantime, thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you soon.